So that brings us into a new method, factoring by grouping. And the goal of factoring by grouping is to group the terms in a way that the grouping will allow you to factor out a greatest common factor. So for example, also notice that when we're going to use grouping, this is used when there is 4 terms. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. And so what we're going to do is group them. So I'm going to group the first two. I'm going to call this group 1. And then I'm going to call the second group group 2. So basically what you want to do is, if I was to cover up group 2, then we can factor out any common terms from here. So this has a 1, this has a 2. So then what's common to 1 and 2 is 1. But then this is x cubed and this is x squared. So what's common to x cubed and x squared would be x squared. They both have at least an x squared. So for this term here, I'm going to factor out an x squared. Yeah, so just ignore the second group for now. So what I'm doing is I'm going to divide this by x squared and this by x squared. So I'm going to be left with x cubed divided by x squared is x, and x squared divided by x squared is 2. So now we look at the other group, and here we have 9 and 18. And we can see that what they have in common is the 9. Okay, so we're going to factor out a 9. I cannot factor out an x because 18 doesn't have an x. And so what we're doing is dividing each term by 9. So 9 divided by 9 is 1, and 18 divided by 9 is 2. Okay, so now we look at this. Your goal should be that these two terms are the same. Okay? So if I had ignored this negative here for a second, then if I write here a positive because I want them to be the same, then I have 9x plus 2. In the original, we need to have a negative 9x and a negative 18. So in order for that to be true, I'm going to have to make sure that in front of this 9 is a negative. So we have negative 9 times x is negative 9x. Negative 9 times 2 is negative 18. And so now you can see that this will give me negative 9x minus 18. More importantly, our two parentheses are the same. Since up two parentheses are the same, I can factor out an x plus 2. If I remove x plus 2 out of here, then I'm only going to be left with x squared. And if I remove this x plus 2 out here, then I'm left with minus 9. We always check the parentheses, make sure that we can't factor anymore. This x squared minus 9 will factor as x minus 3 and x plus 3, which I'll come back and show you. We'll discuss why this comes out as x minus 3 and x plus 3. So this is your factored form. Okay, so let's look at the next one here. Six minus 2x squared plus x squared y cubed minus 3y cubed. Okay, so if I look at this first group, I have a 6 and a 2. So you can see 2 is your greatest common factor. I don't have no x here, so I'm just going to factor out a 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2 divided by 2 is negative x squared. Since we know that these should be the same, then I'm automatically just going to write the same thing on this side and then work a little bit backwards. Okay. So if we look at these two terms, what do they have in common is the y cubed. So y cubed is what's going to be factored, so that's going to be out here. So now I have y cubed times 3 is 3y cubed. So here's 3y cubed. And y cubed times negative x squared is going to be x squared y cubed. But notice that the 3y cubed should be negative. So in this middle part, we need to figure out, should this be a plus or a minus? Since I need this to be negative, then I'm going to put a negative here. So negative y cubed times 3 is negative 3y cubed. Negative y cubed times negative x squared is positive x squared y cubed. So now you can see that these are exactly the same. So I can factor that to the front, bring it out to the front. So I'm left with the 2. And if I bring this out to the front, I'm left with y cubed. Okay, so that's when we have 4 terms, we can use grouping. So now let's look at factoring trinomials. So here, whenever we have 3 terms, then we're going to be using this example, since notice the x squared doesn't have a number in front. And so once we factor, we're going to end up with 2 parentheses. Okay, so we can start by looking at a constant. That's the number without the x's. And so for negative 6, we're going to write down the factors of negative 6. So I'm going to have 1 times negative 6, or I could have negative 1 times 6, 2 times negative 3, or negative 2 times 3. All of these will give me negative 6 if I multiply. Then we're going to be adding and subtracting these factors. So for example, if I do 1 plus negative 6, I get negative 5. Negative 1 plus 6 is positive 5. 2 plus negative 3 is negative 1. And negative 2 plus 3 is positive 1. Your goal is to find the factors that will give you this middle coefficient. So in front of x, we have a negative 1. So your goal is to look at these factors when you add or subtract. Do you have any that produce negative 1? And so we do. That's going to be these two factors give me a negative 1. So I'm going to use these two factors when I factor my term. So I'm going to have x squared minus x minus 6. I'm going to end up with 2 parentheses. We get x times x because that gives me x squared. And then I'm going to use this 2 and this negative 3. Yeah. And to make sure that we did it correct, we can check our work. Okay, so if I multiply x times x, I get x squared. X times minus 3 is negative 3x plus 2x minus 6. Gather your like terms, and you can see that this is the same as the original problem. Okay, so now let's look at example 14. We have 60. I can get 60 from 1 times 60, 2 times 30, 3 times 20, 4 times 15, 5 times 12, 6 times 10. Okay. Then we're going to add and subtract. And our goal is to get this middle number. Okay, so 1 plus 60 is 60. 2 plus 30 is 32. 3 plus 20 is 23. 4 plus 15 is 19. 5 plus 12 is 17. 6 plus 10 is 16. So that means that we're going to use these two factors. So here's my polynomial. And we're going to need two parentheses. I have x times x, and then our two factors are 6 and 10. If we check, we get x times x is x squared, x times 10 is 10, x plus 6 times x is 6x, which gives me 16x. 6 times 10 is 60. Okay, the next one we have 12. So my factors of 12. Notice that on the previous one, all our signs were positive, so we don't have to consider any of the negatives. But whenever you have some signs that are subtraction or negative, then we have to consider some of the negative values as well. So here, to get a 12, I can say 1 times 12. But since I have a negative involved, I can also say negative 1 times negative 12. That gives me a positive 12 as well. 2 times 6 gives me 12. Negative 2 times negative 6 will give me positive 12. 3 times 4 and negative 3 times negative 4 will give me a 12. If I add, 1 plus 12 is 13. Negative 1 plus negative 12 is negative 13. 2 plus 6 is 8. Negative 6 plus negative 2 is negative 8. 3 plus 4 is 7. And negative 3 and negative 4 is negative 7. Sometimes we have to subtract, but if you don't have to, then you don't have to do this part once you find your factors. So my goal is to find two numbers that give me negative 7. So that's what I need. And so here we can see that the one that gives us negative 7 is negative 3 and negative 4. So I have x times x, and then we have negative 3 and negative 4. Again, you can check your work. X times x is x squared. X times negative 4 is negative 4x. Negative 3x. Negative 3 and negative 4 is positive 12. So you can see this is the same as the original polynomial. Okay, so now notice that we still have 3 terms, but now we have a number in front of the 2. So we're going to be factoring these a little bit different. So the first step is going to be to multiply a times c. In other words, you're going to multiply the number in front of the x squared times your constant. Okay, so we multiply a times c. So in our example, we would have 2 times negative 4, and that's negative 8. Then we follow the steps that we had originally. So this would be 1 times negative 8, or negative 1 times 8, 2 times negative 4, or negative 2 times positive 4. If we add, then we get 1 plus negative 8 is negative 7, positive 7, 2 plus negative 4 is negative 2, and positive 2. your goal is to again get this middle term, which is -7. So here, the 1 and the -8 will produce that -7. And so the only difference here is because we have this 2, it's going to work a little bit different. We can't just use these numbers because of that -2. So what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite this problem as 2x squared. Instead of -7, we're going to write it as, instead of -7x, we're going to write it as 1x. And then we have a -8, so I'm going to write -8x. And then we have -4. Okay. So this right here is taking place of this -7x. Okay. What happens is we have created a polynomial that now has 4 terms. And since we have 4 terms, we can use grouping, which means we're going to group these first terms, and then I'm going to group the second terms. Okay. So from the first term, I can see that they both have an x in common, and so I'm going to factor out an x. So if I take out an x from x squared, I get left with 1. And if I bring this x to the front, then I'm left with 1. So notice x times 2x is 2x squared, x times 1 is x. And then I'm going to have another parentheses. And remember, whatever you have in here, you want to have the same thing on this side. So I'm just going to go ahead and write it, and then I'll work myself backwards. So for the second group, I have an 8 and a 4. So what they have in common is a 4. So that 4 would be outside in the parentheses. And now you can see that 4 times 2x is 8x. 4 times 1 is 4. However, we need the 8 to be negative. So I'm going to need to have a subtraction here. So -4 times 2x is -8x. -4 times 1 is -4. So now these two terms are the same, so we can factor that one out to the front. If I bring this to the front, I'm left with x, and I bring this to the front, I'm left with 4. So these are the two parentheses that we get for our factor. Okay, so let's try the next one. So first we multiply the a times the c. 6 times 20 is 120. And then the factors will be 1 times 120, or you can have -1 times -120. And so then we have 2 times 60, or -2 times -60, 3 times 40, or -3 times -40, 4 times 30, or -4 times 30, 5 times 24, or we can have -5 times -24, 6 times 20, or -6 times 20. 7 doesn't go into 120. 8 would be, so 8 goes into 12 one time. 48 times 5 is 15. 8 times 5 is 40, carry, yeah. And then -8 times -15. And that would be it. So we want to add these, and our goal is to find -23. So these up here are going to be pretty big. So I'm just going to continue on this side. So we get to 6 plus 20 is 26. So the one that's going to give me 23 is down here. 8 plus 15, that's positive 23. Negative 8 and negative 15 is negative 23. So I can write my polynomial as 6x squared negative 23x. I'm going to write down negative 8x minus 15x plus 20. So again, this right here is taking place of that negative 23x. Okay, so we can regroup these. So I'm going to group this term and this term. So here I have a 6 and an 8. So notice for 6 and 8, we have the common term would be a 2. So we'll factor out a 2, and I can factor out an x. So we get 3x minus 4. 2x times 3x is 6x squared. 2x minus 4 is negative 8x. Go ahead and try this one. Okay, since we want to have the same thing, I'm just going to write down 3x minus 4. And then I have 15 and 20. So we have 15 and 20. The factors, the greatest common factor would be a 5. So I can factor out a 5. 5 times 3 is 15x. 5 times 4 is 20. The 15 has to be negative, so this is going to require a negative here. Negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. Negative negative is positive 20. Now they have this in common, so I can factor that out to the front. If I remove this, I'm left with 2x. If I factor this out, I'm left with minus 5. Okay, the next one we have 3x squared plus 10x minus 8. We've multiplied 3 times negative 8. That's negative 24. So I can get it by 1 times negative 24, or negative 1 times 24, 2 times negative 12, or negative 2 times 12, 3 times negative 8, or negative 3 times positive 8, 4 times negative 6, negative 4 times 6. So now we need to find a factor that's going to give me a 10. So if I add, this is negative 23, 23, negative 10, positive 10. So we want to use negative 2 and 12. So instead of 10x, I'm going to use 3x squared. Instead of 10x, I'm going to use negative 2 and positive 12. Okay, so my new polynomial is 3x squared minus 2x plus 12x minus 8. Now we can try to factor this. So I'm going to group these. The only thing they have in common, 3 and 2 is 1, so we don't need to factor out anything there for those coefficients. But then I have x squared and I have an x, so I can factor out an x. So if I remove 1x from here, I'm left with 3x minus 2. I need this to be the same parentheses, so I'm just going to write it down. And then I have the 12 and the 8. So for 12 and 8, what they have in common would be the 4. So I can factor out a 4. 4 times 3x is 12x. 4 times 2 is negative 8. And I need the 12x to be positive, so I'm going to write a plus here. 4 times 3 is positive 12x. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Now they have this in common, so I can factor that out. If I factor this out, I'm left with x. And if I factor this out, I'm left with 4. The next thing we want to look at is the difference of squares. And so for the difference of squares, if you have a squared minus b squared, then we can write this as a plus b, and then a minus b. Notice that one is positive, one is negative. If I multiply this out, I get a times a is a squared. A times b is negative ab plus ba will cancel out, and b minus b is b squared. So just so we can see it, a times a is a squared, a times negative b is negative ab plus ba minus b squared. So these terms in the middle become 0, giving us a squared minus b squared. So anytime you have two numbers that are squared this way, there's a possibility that it's going to factor out this way. Well, it's going to factor out this way. If you see a plus b and a minus b, what happens is that middle term is becoming 0. So x squared minus 9. Here, if we look at this 9 could be written as 3 squared. And so notice that now you have a squared, which is x squared, and b squared, which is 3 squared. So according to this, we can write our answer in factor form would be this right here. And so here I get x, and then I'm going to get a 3. One would be positive, and one would be negative. You don't have to keep writing it this way. What you can do is think of the number 9 and ask yourself, can I multiply two numbers that are the same that will give me 9? And so in that case, it was 3 times 3. Okay, so if we look at 36, is there two numbers that you can multiply together to give you 36? And that's going to be 6 times 6. So for p, we have a p, and then you're going to have a positive and a negative one, and 36 is 6 times 6. For 100, there's two numbers that you can multiply to get 100. So we have m times m for the m squared. And then for 100, we have 10 times 10. One would be negative, one would be positive. And last over here, we have r squared minus m squared. And so here we have two parentheses. We have r. R times r is r. And then this one is already has the m squared. So this would be m times n. One is positive, one is negative. So the difference of squares, these type of examples come up a lot on the exam. Okay, so let's practice a few more. So for x squared, we get x times x. And for n squared, y squared, we're going to have ny times ny. N times n is n squared. Y times y is y squared. You want to make sure the middle term cancels, so one is negative and one is positive. Here we have x squared and y squared, so we need xy times xy will give me x squared y squared. And on this side, we have r and p. So one would be negative and one would be positive. As we go through the 3 days, you'll see these come up quite a bit. These are extra examples. So if you want to pause the video, work on some of these first, and then come back and check the answers. Okay. So it says the exam is multiple choice. So these questions are here so that you can get used to working with multiple choice questions. So here it just says 16r4t minus 6r cubed t squared plus 4rt squared equals, and then they give you a bunch of information. So the first thing you should always do is ask yourself, can I factor out a greatest common factor? So here we have 16r4t minus 6r cubed t squared plus 4rt squared. So the numbers are 16, 6, and 4. So what they have in common is this number 2. And then as far as the variables, we have r here, we have r, and we have r. So we have r4, r cubed, and r. So that means that we're going to use just one r, okay? And then we have a t squared, and a t squared. So we're going to use 1t. So my GCF, my greatest common factor, is 2, r, and t. Okay, so we're going to take 2rt, place it on the outside. And then each term we're dividing by 2rt. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. R4 divided by r is r cubed. And t divided by t is 1. 6 divided by 2 is 3. R cubed divided by r is r squared. And t squared divided by t is t. 4 divided by 2 is 2. R divided by r is 1. And t squared divided by t is t. Okay, so this is our answer. And so that looks like 2rt, which is right here, 8r minus 3rt plus 2t. So that would be letter A. Here I have two terms separated with a subtraction. So this is going to be a difference of squares. And so previously we did some of these examples. So p squared q squared would be pq times pq, and then rs is rs. And rs, one is positive, one is negative. And so that would be letter D. If you're not sure, let's say you're taking the exam, you forget about factoring the GCF or the difference of squares. Since it is multiple choice, you can work backwards. You can multiply this times this and see which one will give you this answer. So you would multiply all of these, see which one gives you the answer, and the same here. Which of the following is a factor of both x squared minus 2x minus 3 and x squared minus 5x minus 6? So here, in order to figure out which is a factor of both, we need to factor. So we have negative 3 is 1 times negative 3, or negative 1 times 3. If I add, then I'm trying to get negative 2. 1 plus negative 3 is negative 2. So that means that we're going to be using 1 and negative 3. So x squared minus 2x minus 3 factors as x plus 1 and x minus 3. And then on this side, we have x squared minus 5x minus 6. So we get 1 times negative 6 and negative 1 times 6, 2 times negative 3, or negative 2 times 3. If we add, 1 plus negative 6 is negative 5. So that's the one we want to use. So if we factor, then we get x plus times x plus 1, and x minus 6. It wants to know which is a factor of both. So notice that they both have x plus 1. So my answer would be D. If x squared plus kx minus 8 is equal to this, then k is going to be what? So here we can multiply x minus 4 times x plus 2. X times x is x squared plus 2x minus 4x minus 8. So we end up with x squared minus 4x minus 2x minus 8. So if we compare what they give us, they want to know what k is. So k is going to be negative 2. Which of the following expressions is equivalent to a plus b times a minus b? So here we can multiply, or you can think about the difference of squares. So I'm just going to multiply a times a is a squared. A times b is negative ab plus ba minus b squared. Negative ab plus ba is 0. And so we get a squared minus b squared. So letter A, which of the following is not a factor of x cubed? X cubed minus 3x squared minus 4x plus 12. So since there's 4 terms, we can use grouping. So if I look at the first terms, what they have in common is an x squared. So I can factor out an x squared. So x cubed divided by x squared is x. And x squared divided by x is just negative 3. I want to have the same parentheses. And then 4 and 12, what they have in common is 4. I need the 4 to be negative. Negative 4x is negative 4x. Negative 4 times negative 3 is positive 12. They have an x minus 3 in common, so I can factor that out, leaving me with x squared minus 4. Notice this is a perfect square, so that's going to be x minus 3. X squared minus 4 would be x minus 2, and x plus 2. So the question is, which is not a factor? So x minus 2 is a factor, x plus 2 is a factor, x minus 3 is a factor, so letter D is not a factor. And then last, we have x plus 2 times x minus 3. X times x is x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 6. So that's going to be letter C. So this completes day 1 of our TSI bootcamp. You want to make sure that you practice some of these problems, and you can look in the course for more information on getting that practice.